picture this.
Mm-mm.
And I really want you to put yourself in this exact scenario.
Yeah, really try to visualize it.
Right. So you are walking home alone late at night. And we have all been there, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It is past midnight. It's, the kind of late where the world has just seemingly given up on the day and gone to sleep.
Yeah, totally dead out.
Exactly. You are surrounded by nothing but those slightly buzzing, flickering streetlights.
The ones that cast those really long shadows.
Yes, those incredibly long, distorted shadows on the pavement. And it is just you, the chill in the air, and your own thoughts bouncing around in your head.
It is a very, very specific moment of vulnerability.
It really is.
Because psychologically speaking, you are existing in what we call a liminal space.
Right.
You are neither at your origin nor your destination. You are, you're in transit.
You're just in between.
Exactly. And evolutionary biology tells us that the dark, empty path is exactly where we are most vulnerable.
Because that's where the predators are.
Right. Our ancestors feared the dark for intensely practical reasons. That is literally where the predators hide.
Yeah, and even in a modern concrete city, when the crowds vanish and the lights dim, that ancient circuitry in our brains just automatically lights up.
It's hardwired.
We become acutely aware of our surroundings, our isolation, and just our profound aloneness.
Yeah.
But usually that feeling is just a fleeting shiver.
Right, you walk a little faster.
Exactly. You walk a little faster, you get home, you lock your deadbolt, and you completely forget about
You
it.
just brush it off as paranoia.
Right. You lock the door and just watch TV and forget about it. But what if that feeling wasn't just paranoia?
Yeah.
What if that heightened awareness was actually a symptom of a mechanical process happening to you?
Well, that's the terrifying part.
It is. And today, we are going deep into a narrative that treats that exact universally relatable scenario not as a fleeting feeling, but as a flawlessly executed trap.
It's a fascinating piece of source material.
It really is.
Yeah.
For this deep dive, we are unpacking a genuinely chilling text. It's an excerpt from a YouTube video uploaded by a channel called The Midnight Curator.
Right.
And it's titled, "I Turned Around and Saw Myself Standing There."
It is a remarkable piece of text. I mean, if you just skim it, it masquerades as a classic ghost story.
Like a creepypasta or something.
Yeah, exactly. A piece of internet folklore designed to give you a quick scare.
Right.
But if you actually analyze the mechanics of what the author is describing, it is a highly meticulous chronological study of identity theft.
Wow.
Yeah, it explores sensory manipulation and the profound, deeply internal terror of losing complete control over your own body and your own mind.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going to deconstruct this experience step by step. We want to track the exact progression of this psychological invasion, starting from the very first subtle external signal.
All the way to the end.
Right. All the way to the ultimate horrifying assimilation of consciousness.
Because before a predator can attack, it has to isolate its prey.
Exactly. But in this narrative, the brilliant and, terrifying thing is that the isolation doesn't happen by physically dragging a victim to a secondary location.
No, not at all.
The isolation happens by stripping away the environment itself.
It is a profound disruption of the baseline reality.
Yeah.
The text starts with that normal, quiet walk you just described, the rhythmic sound of footsteps.
Just the normal stuff.
Right, the wandering, random, intrusive thoughts that we all get when our brains are just idling on a walk.
Yeah, making grocery lists or...
Exactly. But then there is a radical shift.
Okay.
The text describes the distant hum of the city completely cutting out.
Just gone.
Gone. The wind stops. The victim is suddenly plunged into what the narrative explicitly calls a total sensory vacuum.
A sensory vacuum.
Yes, where the only remaining sound is the biological function of their own breathing.
Which feels incredibly claustrophobic just thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely.
But I want to dig into the mechanics of that. Why does our brain freak out so much when the noise disappears?
It's a great question.
Because we tend to think of silence as peaceful, like a quiet room is nice. Why is a sudden sensory vacuum terrifying?
Because we tend to think of silence as an absence, right? A lack of something.
Yeah.
But sudden, absolute silence in an open environment is profoundly unnatural.
Okay, right.
Your brain is essentially a prediction machine. It relies constantly heavily on ambient noise to orient itself in physical reality.
Even when it's quiet.
Even when you think your living room is quiet, there is the hum of the refrigerator.
Oh, sure.
There's the distant rumble of traffic miles away, the subtle rustling of air moving through the vents.
Right, AC units and stuff.
Exactly. Your brain filters out 99% of this background noise consciously.
So we don't notice it.
Right. But unconsciously, the auditory cortex is using it to construct a three-dimensional map of your environment.
Oh, wow. So it's basically doing a passive echolocation all the time.
That's exactly it. It tells you how large the space is.
Okay.
It tells you if you are indoors or outdoors, the density of the objects around you, and crucially, if anything is moving toward you.
Because it blocks the sound.
Yes. So when you remove all of that ambient data simultaneously, the brain's orienting system just crashes.
It just blue screens.
Basically, yeah. The text describes this silence as having a weight pressing inward.
Like a physical weight.
Right, noting that the space wasn't empty but had been deliberately cleared away.
Deliberately.
Yeah. When the auditory map vanishes, your amygdala immediately fires a threat signal.
It knows something's up.
Exactly. It tells your nervous system that something is deeply foundationally wrong.
You know, it sounds exactly like sensory deprivation.
It really does.
You know what it reminds me of? Have you ever seen one of those anechoic chambers they use for acoustic testing?
Oh, the ones completely lined with those jagged fiberglass wedges?
Yes, those exact ones.
The ones designed to absorb 99.9% of acoustic reflections.
Right, right. And the people who go into them report that it is incredibly distressing, almost immediately.
Yeah, people can't stay in them very long.
No, they can't. The silence is so absolute, so oppressive, that within minutes, your auditory system adapts by turning its sensitivity all the way up.
Searching for an input.
Yes, trying to find any signal at all.
Yeah.
And because there is no external signal, you start hearing the biology of your own body.
Which is unsettling.
Very. You hear your own heartbeat, you hear your blood rushing through your veins, you hear the grinding of your joints in your own digestive tract.
It's awful.
The silence stops being peaceful and becomes aggressively claustrophobic. It makes you feel entirely trapped inside yourself.
Yes.
You are no longer existing in the world. You are suddenly acutely aware that you are trapped inside a biological machine.
That is the perfect parallel. Because in an anechoic chamber, the external world is erased.
Right.
Leaving only the internal biological reality. And that is exactly what the entity in this narrative is forcing upon the victim.
It's forcing that isolation.
Right. It is erasing the external world, the city, the wind, the distant traffic, to trap the victim inside their own perception.
But it isn't just a parlor trick to scare them.
No, not at all. The environment wasn't cleared away for ambiance. It was a functional necessity.
Right, it's clearing the airwaves.
Exactly.
The sensory vacuum is constructed specifically to create a completely clean, static-free channel for what comes next.
Because it needs to speak.
Yes, because in that heavy, oppressive silence, a thought breaks through.
A thought.
But the text is very specific here. It says this thought is too sharp, too deliberate to be the victim's own memory or worry.
It's distinct.
Yeah, it describes it feeling like an external broadcast.
Ooh.
And the message is just two words, a simple, terrifying command.
Turn around.
Turn around.
This is the moment the narrative transitions from environmental horror to an incredibly intimate psychological violation.
Because it's inside their head.
Right. Think about the sanctity of the human mind. Our internal monologue is our ultimate private sanctuary.
It's the only place that's just ours.
It is the one place that is entirely ours. We can lock our doors, we can put up physical fences, we can learn self-defense to protect our physical bodies, but the mind is supposed to be an impenetrable fortress.
Right. No one can see your thoughts.
Exactly. By hijacking that internal space, the entity completely bypasses all physical defenses.
Wow.
There are no walls that can keep out a broadcast that originates inside your own skull.
It's the ultimate home invasion.
It really is.
They didn't pick the lock on the front door.
Yeah.
They somehow just spawned directly inside the panic room.
That's a great way to put it. And look at the physiological response the text describes.
Yep.
The victim's muscles lock.
Yeah.
And their breath hitches. The narrative brilliantly identifies this as a lizard brain response.
Right. I wanted to ask about that. Unpack that for us. What is actually happening neurologically in that fraction of a second?
Well, the lizard brain colloquially refers to the basal ganglia and the brainstem,
Okay.
which manage our most primitive survival instincts.
So basic survival stuff.
Right. When a threat is detected, the signal travels to the amygdala.
The fear center.
Exactly, which triggers an immediate physiological response before the information even reaches the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the logical part, right?
Yes, it's the logical thinking part of your brain. The prefrontal cortex is slow.
It needs time to process.
Right. It wants to analyze the situation, figure out where the voice came from, and determine if it's real.
But the body doesn't wait for that.
No, the basal ganglia doesn't care about logic. It just recognizes an existential breach and instantly locks the muscles to prepare for fight or flight.
Wow.
This involuntary physical reaction proves that the body recognizes the danger before the conscious mind can even process what is happening.
The body knows the fortress has been breached.
The body always knows first.
It's terrifying. But the text makes a really crucial distinction here about the nature of this threat. And I want to challenge you on this a little bit.
Okay, sure.
It says the real terror doesn't come from aggression. It comes from the patience behind the words.
Yes.
It calls this broadcast an invitation waiting for you to accept it.
Right.
Now, I struggle with that.
Why is that?
Well, if someone charges at me with a weapon, screaming, I am terrified.
Naturally.
My nervous system is in full panic.
Yeah.
How can a patient, quiet thought something, doing literally nothing, be worse for the human nervous system than active, violent aggression?
It is a really great question. Because we are conditioned to fear violence.
Right.
But aggression implies a contest.
A contest.
Yeah. If a predator charges at you, there is a physical struggle. You can run, you can fight, you can hide.
You have options.
Exactly. There are variables, and within those variables, the brain can find hope.
Oh, I see.
You might be faster. You might be stronger. You might find a weapon.
There's a chance to win.
Exactly. There's a chance. But patience. Patience from a predator implies absolute certainty. Think about the difference between a wolf pack chasing down an elk versus a trapdoor spider waiting in the dark.
Ugh, spiders.
Right. When a predator is patient, it means it already knows it has won.
Because the trap is set.
Yes. It doesn't need to exert energy because the outcome is entirely inevitable. The trap is so perfectly constructed that the predator can just sit back and wait.
That is chilling.
And furthermore, by framing it as an invitation, the entity is forcing the victim to be complicit in their own destruction.
It wants them to choose it.
Exactly. It places the burden of action onto the victim. The entity is saying, I am here, I am already inside your defenses, and I am just waiting for you to finalize the transaction.
Wow. Okay, so the tension is just building and building.
Okay.
The victim is standing there, locked up in a totally silent street with a foreign thought sitting in their brain like a dormant computer virus.
Just waiting to be executed.
Just waiting for the user to click it.
Yeah.
And the patience demands a response.
It does. The human mind cannot tolerate unresolved tension indefinitely.
It has to break.
The silence has to break. And it is the victim's very human, completely understandable, desperate attempt to comfort themselves that ultimately seals their fate.
Yes. And this brings us to what is objectively the most tragic mistake in the entire narrative.
It really is heartbreaking.
Because if it were me, I would do exactly what the victim does.
Well, most people would.
They try to cope.
Yeah.
They try to self-soothe by whispering out loud. It's just your imagination.
Right.
Just a tiny whisper. But the text tells us that the street absorbs the sound without an echo.
The vacuum again?
Exactly. And the narrator reveals that by speaking into that void, by trying to rationally talk themselves down, the victim has actually acknowledged the voice.
Yes.
And because of that acknowledgement, the dynamic fundamentally shifts.
The rules change.
The presence transitions from being just a thought in your head to a physical shadow on the pavement.
This is a fascinating exploration of the metaphysical rules of engagement.
Okay, tell me more.
In many predatory scenarios, both in ancient folklore and in modern psychology, acknowledgement is the mechanism that validates a threat.
If you don't look at it, it isn't real.
Kind of, yeah. As long as the entity was just a thought, a broadcast, it was confined to the cognitive realm. It was an idea.
Like a ghost in the machine.
Right. But the victim attempts to use their physical voice to ground themselves in physical reality.
Because that's how we comfort ourselves.
Exactly. They are trying to assert dominance over their environment by filling the unnatural silence with their own familiar sound.
Right, hearing their own voice.
They are trying to remind themselves that they exist in the real world.
But the environment is already compromised. It absorbed the sound.
Precisely. By speaking out loud, the victim essentially confirmed receipt of the external broadcast.
Oh, whoa.
They sent a ping back to the server.
Like a read receipt.
Exactly. They proved that the channel was open, that the message was received, and most importantly, that they were listening and reacting.
So they engaged.
Yes. In the specific mythology of this encounter, that vocal acknowledgement provided the entity with the exact anchor it needed to pull itself out of the abstract cognitive realm and manifest into the tangible physical world.
That's horrifying.
The internal thought literally casts a shadow.
You know, when I first read that, I thought it felt exactly like responding to a phishing email or a spam text message.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
You know, those shady texts you get that say, reply S.P to unsubscribe from these daily alerts.
Yes, the classic digital trap. I hate those.
Right. And your first instinct is to reply S.P because you think you are protecting yourself.
You think you're opting out.
Exactly. You think you are shutting the situation down and taking control. But the spammer doesn't actually care what you text back.
No, not at all.
By replying S.P, you aren't unsubscribing from anything. You're just signaling to the attacker that there is a live human on the other end of the line.
Right, the number works.
You are confirming the phone number is active. The victim whispering, it's just your imagination, is them replying S.P to the universe's scariest spam text.
Wow.
The spammer now knows the line is active.
The spam text analogy works perfectly, but the reality here is, well, it's infinitely worse.
Because you can't throw your body away.
Exactly. With a spam text, you can turn off the phone, you can block the number, throw the device away.
Right.
Here, the phone is your own biological vocal cords. You used your own physical biology to validate an anomaly. And once that connection is confirmed, the entity doesn't need to stay in the victim's head anymore.
It's out.
It has a physical foothold.
And that is when the real pursuit begins.
Yes, it is.
But this isn't, you know, a slasher movie chase.
No.
The text describes a pursuit that is entirely psychological. The victim naturally starts walking faster, trying to outrun this creeping dread.
Sure, picking up the pace.
But the source of the voice has moved. It is no longer an internal thought, and it's no longer just a vague shadow on the periphery.
It's closer.
It is now occupying the physical space directly behind their neck.
Right on them.
And then, well, a second set of footsteps begins.
Yeah. The introduction of the second set of footsteps is an absolute masterclass in pacing terror.
It really is.
The text emphasizes that these steps are heavy, deliberate, and entirely separate from the victim's own.
So they know it's not an echo.
Exactly. But it is the specific mechanics of those footsteps that elevates this from a simple pursuit to profound psychological torture.
It's the tethering.
Yes.
The exact perfect mimicry. The text says that when the victim stops, the secondary footsteps stop instantly.
Immediately.
When the victim lunges forward in a panic, the heavy steps match the rhythm perfectly.
Step for step.
The entity has tethered its movement to the victim.
This concept of tethered mimicry is absolutely horrific.
Why is that worse than just being chased?
Well, because the entity isn't just following the victim down the street like a normal stalker.
Okay.
It has aggressively linked its physical existence to the victim's autonomous actions.
So it's feeding off them.
Think about what this does to a person's neurology. It strips away their agency entirely.
How so?
When you are being chased by a conventional threat, your survival instincts kick in.
Fight or flight.
Right. You run to gain distance. You dodge to break line of sight. You stop to listen and assess.
Right. You make choices.
Exactly. Those are actions you take to save yourself. But here, the entity turns those very survival instincts into the mechanism that propels the monster forward.
Because if you run, you are literally just making the monster run.
Exactly. You become the engine of your own pursuit.
Oh, that's terrible.
If you stop, you freeze the monster right behind your neck. Every choice you make is instantly weaponized against you.
So you can't win.
It creates an inescapable feedback loop. You are no longer acting to save yourself. You are simply providing the tempo for your own stalker.
But wait, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If the entity is perfectly matching them and it's right behind them, why doesn't it just grab them?
That's the trick.
I mean, the chase is functionally over. What is the point of this mimicking game?
Because it is systematically breaking down the victim's mind to soften the target.
Softening the target.
Yes. Neurologically, it is inducing a state called learned helplessness.
Okay, break that down for me. What is learned helplessness in this context?
So learned helplessness was famously studied by a psychologist named Martin Seligman in the late 1960s.
Okay.
He found that when an organism is subjected to an uncontrollable, inescapable, aversive stimulus, like a shock they cannot avoid, they eventually stop trying to escape.
They just give up.
Right. Even if an opportunity to escape is later presented, they won't take it.
Because they've learned it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Neurologically, a specific part of the brainstem called the dorsal raphe nucleus essentially shuts down the escape response.
Oh, wow.
The brain learns that its actions have absolutely no effect on the outcome.
So you become biologically sedated by your own despair.
That is exactly it. That's a great way to phrase it. In this narrative, the victim realizes that running doesn't create distance.
Because the footsteps match them.
Right. Stopping doesn't provide safety. Their actions are completely decoupled from their survival.
So the panic just burns itself out into hopelessness.
Exactly. The tethered mimicry accelerates this psychological breakdown, completely crushing the victim's will to resist.
And the text takes that mimicry to a level that is almost hard to stomach.
It gets so much worse.
It does. The panic is setting in. The victim's chest is tightening. Their heart is hammering against their ribs.
Right.
And the text notes that in this dead air, the thing behind them is so close that it begins pacing its own breath to the victim's hammering heartbeat.
It is the ultimate demonstration of inescapable intimacy.
It's so invasive.
It is no longer just mimicking gross motor movements like walking.
Yeah.
It has synced itself to the victim's involuntary biological rhythms.
Things you can't even control.
Exactly. This is a predatory form of entrainment.
Yeah.
The victim cannot control their heart rate. They are terrified.
Right.
But by syncing its breath to that frantic pulse, the entity is communicating complete and total dominance.
It's showing off.
It is saying, I am not just behind you. I am reading your physiological telemetry.
Wow.
I am a part of your autonomic nervous system now.
It's like being forced to dig your own grave, step by step, breath by breath.
Yeah.
You are doing the labor of your own demise.
And that psychological breakdown is merely phase one.
Phase one.
Yes. The entity has used learned helplessness to break the mind's will to resist. The mind has surrendered.
Oh, I see.
Now the entity moves in to take the body.
Which brings us to the climax of this terrifying encounter.
The final move.
The ultimatum. The command, turn around, comes again.
Right.
But the text explicitly states that the patience we discussed earlier is gone.
It's done waiting.
It is no longer a broadcast or an invitation. It is an ultimatum delivered at point-blank range.
Face to face. Well, back to face.
Right. The victim feels the cold displacement of air. They feel the physical pressure of something massive standing inches away.
The spatial dynamic has totally changed.
The distance has vanished entirely, and they are caught in its gravity.
The language here is incredibly tactile, shifting from the psychological to the physical.
Yeah, it's very sensory.
Cold displacement of air, physical pressure, caught in its gravity.
You can almost feel it.
The entity has manipulated the environment, hijacked the internal monologue, matched the physical movements to break the will, and now it has closed the spatial gap.
There's nowhere left to go.
The victim is anchored in place, they are unable to move forward and terrified to look back.
And in that moment of absolute paralysis, the victim finally speaks.
They finally break the silence themselves.
They ask the question out loud. They say, "What are you?"
That question is the final, pathetic surrender of agency.
Really? How so?
Well, by asking the entity to define itself, the victim is conceiving that they no longer understand their own reality.
Oh, they're looking to the monster for truth.
Exactly. They are asking the predator for answers.
And the response is a dry, familiar whisper right against their ear.
Yeah.
Just 3 words you already know.
You already know.
That gave me chills.
That is the chilling confirmation that this isn't an alien creature, a random monster, or some external demon.
So what is it?
It strongly implies that the entity is the shadow self.
Okay, wait, the Jungian shadow.
Yes, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow.
Walk me through that.
In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the unconscious aspect of the personality that the conscious ego does not identify with.
The parts we hide.
Exactly. It is the suppressed, dark, unknown side of the self. Jung believed that everyone carries a shadow,
Sure.
and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is.
So the sensory vacuum, the isolation, it just created the perfect conditions for the suppressed self to leak out.
Precisely. By isolating the victim and stripping away the external distractions of the city, the environment allowed this deeply suppressed shadow to manifest.
Because there was nothing else to look at.
Right. The trap was inevitable because the victim brought the predator with them.
Oh, man.
The external broadcast was actually an internal mutiny.
And once that terrifying truth is spoken, the text describes what I think is the most visceral sensation yet.
It's hard to read.
It says the presence moves inside. It occupies the very space where your will used to be.
Right.
And you become a passenger in your own skin.
Just passenger.
Your head begins to slowly turn, but you aren't the one doing it.
It's moving on its own.
It is a slow, agonizing rotation completely against your volition.
Yeah.
Now, I try to imagine this, but scientifically, what does it physically feel like to lose bodily autonomy like that?
It's hard to fathom.
To be demoted to a passenger while your own body commits mutiny?
It is the ultimate violation of the human experience because we tie our entire concept of consciousness and identity to our ability to command our physical form.
I want to move my arm, I move it.
Exactly. Think of the philosophy of Descartes. I think, therefore I am.
Right.
Our agency is the proof of our existence. I want to raise my hand, my motor cortex fires, my hand raises.
It's a direct link.
That one-to-one correlation is the foundation of reality. To have that severed is to experience a profound waking dissociation.
It sounds like a medical condition.
It is, actually. Neurologically, we can look at conditions like alien hand syndrome.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's where a person's limb genuinely moves without their conscious control. It often acts on its own agenda, grabbing things or even attacking the patient.
It is terrifying.
Or think about sleep paralysis.
Oh, I've had that. It's awful.
It is. The mind wakes up, but the brainstem has locked the motor functions to prevent you from acting out your dream.
Right. You're awake, but you can't move a muscle.
Your conscious mind is screaming to move, but the body refuses to respond to the signals.
It's like a hostile corporate takeover, but enacted upon a biological nervous system.
That's a great analogy.
The CEO, your conscious mind, is still sitting in the corner office.
Right.
But they have been completely locked out of the mainframe.
The passwords are changed.
The emails are sending, the money is moving, the body is turning, and all you can do is watch the monitors.
Yeah.
You are trapped behind your own eyes.
A hostile takeover is the perfect description. The entity hasn't destroyed the consciousness.
It just benched it.
It has displaced it. Look at the progression.
Okay.
It shrank its sphere of influence from the environment to the mind to the space right behind the victim.
Getting smaller and smaller.
And finally, it shrinks that sphere down to a pinpoint inside the victim's own neurological command center.
Right into the driver's seat.
It occupies the literal seat of the will. And it uses that newly acquired control to force the victim to execute the one physical action they have been resisting this entire time.
It forces them to turn around.
Yes.
The entity takes the wheel, leading to the absolute climax of the narrative.
The big reveal.
The moment the physical rotation is complete, triggering a change in reality that completely breaks the rules of physics and perspective.
It shatters them.
The head is forced to turn, and the victim is bracing themselves.
Right. Getting ready?
They're expecting to finally see it. They're expecting the monster, the shadow, the nightmare standing in the empty street.
But they don't.
But instead, they experience this jarring, nauseating perspective shift.
Yeah.
They are no longer in their body.
No.
They're floating 3 inches behind it.
Just hovering.
They are looking at the back of their own head, and the figure standing in the middle of the road, their own body, slowly turns around to face them.
Facing the ghost.
It is wearing their face, but it smiles with an unfamiliar smile, an expression the victim has never made.
A stranger's smile.
And then it echoes their own final words back to them. It says, "Your turn."
It is a breathtaking execution of predatory identity theft.
It's unbelievable.
And this is where the architectural genius of the trap is brilliantly laid bare for the listener.
How so?
The text explicitly tells us that the voice didn't want you to see what was behind you.
All right.
That was the ultimate misdirection. The entity needed the literal physical action of the victim turning around.
Why? Why couldn't it just possess them standing still?
Because it operates on a metaphysical physics of space.
Okay, what does that mean?
It needed the victim to physically vacate a specific spatial and existential coordinate.
To leave their spot.
Right, so it could seamlessly step into the void they left behind.
Yeah.
It needed them to rotate out of their own center of gravity.
It needed them to literally move out of the way so it could take their place.
Yes, it is a terrifying exploration of total identity assimilation.
Yeah.
The victim is entirely displaced from their own reality. They aren't just possessed.
They're evicted.
They are evicted. They are now trapped in the physical and metaphysical position that the monster just occupied a moment ago.
The space behind.
The disembodied observer floating 3 inches behind a physical form. The cycle has completed itself.
Wow.
The predator becomes the prey, and the prey becomes the predator.
I am just marveling at the architectural perfection of this trap.
It's flawless.
I have this image in my head. It is like a predatory hermit crab stealing a shell.
Oh, that's a good one.
But the horror is that the original crab isn't eaten or killed.
No.
It is forced to hover as a ghost, utterly powerless, watching an imposter drive its body away.
Having to watch someone else live your life.
It has to watch someone else live in its house. But I keep fixating on that one specific detail, the face.
Yeah, the smile.
The text says the stolen face smiles an expression you've never made. Why is that the ultimate insult to injury in this act of identity theft?
Because our face is the primary interface through which we interact with the world.
It's how people know us.
Exactly. It's how the world recognizes us. It is the biological canvas of our identity.
Right.
Think about the facial feedback hypothesis in psychology.
What's that?
It's the idea that our facial expressions are deeply tied to our emotional experience.
Oh, like smiling makes you happy.
Right. Even if a perfect duplicate looks exactly like you, the micro-expressions, the way the zygomatic major muscle pulls when you smile.
The tiny little details.
Yes, the specific light in the eyes. Those are uniquely mapped to your specific consciousness.
Your soul, basically.
Exactly. To see your own face contort into a smile that your brain has never authored is the undeniable visual proof that you are gone.
You're not driving anymore.
The physical hardware is exactly the same, but a totally alien operating system is now running it.
That is so bleak.
It is the ultimate violation because it means the theft is complete and it is flawless.
Nobody will know.
The rest of the world will see your face, your friends will see that smile, and they will never, ever know that the real you is trapped as a silent observer.
Just floating 3 inches behind your own skull.
Yeah.
In those final words. Your turn. It implies a horrific cyclicality.
Loop.
The entity was trapped behind someone else, and now it is free.
Right.
And the victim is now the entity, doomed to wander the sensory vacuum until they can find another vulnerable mind walking alone in the dark to whisper to.
It is an endless chain of displacement.
A self-replicating virus of identity theft.
That's a perfect summary. It is incredibly bleak, but as a narrative structure, it is flawless.
It really is. The mechanics of it are just staggering when you break them down.
Yeah, step by step.
We started this deep dive with a seemingly innocent, quiet walk home, a feeling we have all experienced.
We've all been there.
We watched as the environment was methodically stripped away to create a sensory vacuum, crashing the brain's auditory mapping system.
Right, the anechoic chamber effect.
We tracked the invasion as it breached the internal monologue with an external broadcast, hijacking the lizard brain.
Bypassing logic entirely.
We saw the fatal mistake of vocal acknowledgement, sending a ping back to the threat and allowing it to physically manifest.
Spam text trap.
Exactly.
And then we analyzed the profound psychological torture of the tethered mimicry.
The matching footsteps.
Right, how it induced learned helplessness by weaponizing the victim's own survival instincts against them.
Turning their panic into their engine.
We explored the terrifying collapse of bodily autonomy, the alien hand syndrome of the soul, essentially.
Yeah.
As the entity shrank its sphere of influence to occupy the victim's very will.
And finally, we witnessed the ultimate predatory act. Total identity assimilation.
The turnover.
The forced physical rotation that allowed the entity to evict the consciousness and steal the body.
Leaving the victim as a disembodied ghost.
Watching their own face smile, a stranger's smile.
It really is a masterpiece of tension. And when you look at the progression as a whole, it reflects the intense vulnerability of human consciousness.
Because we think we're so solid.
Right. We walk around feeling so secure in our bodies, in our minds, in our unwavering perception of reality.
Of course we do.
But this narrative demonstrates how easily that perception and our very ownership of ourselves can be completely subverted.
Just by taking away the noise.
Yes, when we are isolated from the noise and the anchoring mechanisms of the outside world, it asks us to consider how incredibly fragile the boundary is between the self and the void.
It is a deeply chilling thought, and it brings this entire deep dive right back to your own everyday life.
Because it could be anyone.
Exactly, because we all take those walks.
We do.
We all have those moments of total isolation in the dark where the world goes quiet.
Yeah.
And we all have those random, sharp thoughts that seem to pop into our heads out of absolute nowhere.
Those intrusive thoughts.
Right. So I want to leave you with a final unsettling thought to mull over tonight.
Okay.
The text showed us very clearly that acknowledging the thought speaking to it,
Yeah.
trying to rationalize it, whispering into the dark, is exactly what gave the entity the power to become real.
It's what sealed the deal.
The trap relies entirely on you answering the call.
Yeah.
So the next time you are alone in the dead of night, the house is perfectly quiet, and a random, sharp, intrusive thought pops into your head.
Just out of nowhere.
How can you be entirely sure it actually belongs to you?
That is terrifying.
And more importantly,
Mm.
what will happen if you decide to talk back to it?